Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third workshop in our strategic planning series. Today, we're going to be focusing on data. Uh, every single session, we have a few students from USG who help to facilitate discussion and who take notes to capture their insights and their experience in the breakouts. And I want to personally thank Farah Asghari and Joe Weaver for helping us out today. So Joe and Farah, thank you so much. And I also want to call out the facilitators for the breakouts will be Katie Morris, Henry Mendezies, Mary Lang, Rose Jackson Spicer, and Paula Weiderlight. So thanks everyone for helping us out this morning. So before I provide some context for the session ahead, we always begin our workshops with a mission moment. Someone from the USG community whose experience and expertise highlights the importance of the topic, in this case, data, for the mission and the future of USG. So I'm delighted to introduce Ebony Gadsden, who is an associate systems engineer at Lumen Technologies, and she's a graduate from the University of Maryland College Park Information Science program at USG. Ebony, welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing your mission moment.
Thank you, Dr. K. Hello, everyone. My name is Ebony Gadsden, and I am a May 2020 graduate from University of Maryland College Park, the Information Science program offered at the universities at Shady Grove. I have a long history associated with USG, and I wanted to emphasize the significant role this campus played in my personal growth and professional development. I've started with the USG as an ACES student. For those who do not know what the ACES program is, it partners with USG, MCPS, and Montgomery College to provide educational and career support and opportunities to students from misrepresented communities. As an ACES student, I received tremendous help from USG in identifying my educational and career goals and finding the necessary support to succeed. The USG campus has helped me develop and shape my leadership skills. When I joined the campus as an information science student, a few of my classmates and I established the Ladies in Tech Student Club, designed to support and empower women and non-binaries interested in the field of technology. Thanks to the support and numerous campus resources, the club was very successful. In addition, the USG campus has taught me to advocate for myself and my peers. I served as the chair of events and initiatives on the USG Student Council. One of my many goals was advocating for the USG student body and making sure their voices were heard. Together, we built an environment in which USG students were able to succeed and thrive. Finally, I was a USG campus and information science student ambassador. As an ambassador, I had an opportunity to educate the community about the USG campus and all the wonderful services it offered. Thus, based on my experiences and the experience of my many classmates and friends, I can say that with confidence, USG has been very successful in fulfilling its mission. But how has it been able to continuously meet its goals and fulfill its mission of providing affordable higher education and educating the leaders who are ready to change this world? What role has data played in this process? As you all know, data is no longer a transactional value. It drives decision-making and business objectives. By leveraging data, companies from all industries can improve their customer service, reduce expenditure, increase employee satisfaction, create user-friendly experiences, automate processes, and more. For example, during these challenging times, we have seen the role big data technologies have played or have been used to combat the coronavirus. Leaders in the healthcare industry have been able to make informed decisions on how to track the spread of COVID, flatten the curve, and provide treatments. The USG campus is not an exception. It has been successful in collecting, analyzing, and leveraging data from its current and prospective student populations, academic and industry partners, and various stakeholders to build strategic processes and operations. To give you a few examples, I use data a lot while playing various roles at USG. While on the USG Student Council, we surveyed and collected data from over 200 students to understand and address student commuting concerns. Our findings revealed that almost 40% of the USG student population we surveyed did not have reliable transportation, which affected their commute to and from campus and the overall campus experience. That was a significant percentage of students who were not able to benefit from all the services and departments this campus had to offer because of the limited transportation resources they had. Our report outlining our key findings was submitted to the Campus Transportation Advisory Committee, which has been working on building a strategy to increase USG student access to transportation. And another example, as an information science student ambassador, we did very extensive research on and collected data pertaining to various benefits students received while attending the Shady Grove campus, including all the wonderful services students had access to, money students saved while earning their degrees at the USG campus versus their home campuses, a percentage of students receiving USG scholarships and financial aid. We visualized and had an opportunity to present our findings to the program's prospective student population and other stakeholders. This data and information it generated have been able to convince many students to join the USG family. In addition to being very successful in using data to make decisions, the universities at Shady Grove has also been very successful in supporting academic partners that educate future data analysts and scientists. Information science is one of such partners. This is an interdisciplinary program that teaches students the intersection of big data technologies, information, and people to drive innovation and sustainable solutions in organizations and society. With a focus on data science, the information science program molds the next generation of data decision makers by training them on how to analyze and mine data. Students are provided real-world experiences in preparation for the workforce. One of the most exciting projects that I worked on while being in the program focused on addressing the stigma behind veterans seeking mental health support. We use varied methods to collect and analyze data to understand the barriers veterans have while adjusting to their post-military life. We then recommended solutions helping veterans and their families get access to helpful mental health resources. I want to thank USG for all the wonderful experiences it has given me, and I hope this campus continues to grow and thrive. Thank you.
Ebony, thank you. That was awesome. Thank you so much. We're so proud of the great work you're doing, the leadership you show, and the way you give back always to all of us with your time and energy and mentorship. Thank you so much. So let me just say a few words to set the stage today, and then we'll introduce our guests and get going. So this is a third of 5 workshops that are aimed at injecting new ideas to challenge people's thinking about data, to challenge existing ideas and practices, to identify insights and ideas that might inform and motivate or innovate and change the way we do things. We want to engage everyone across the USG community in building the future of USG. We want to think through the implications of, in this case, embracing a data focus for the organization. So these workshops are aimed at just like getting us thinking about the future of USG, bringing in some new ideas and challenging our thinking. So today we're going to be looking at, the question of what data do we need and why is really, what are the questions that we need to answer at USG? What is our core mission, our strategic direction, and what do we want to accomplish? So it's really about bringing this data question back to the importance of our core questions and our core mission. As a graduate student at Michigan State University many decades ago, I took an exam one time that gave us a statistics table. And the question was, what does this table of statistics tell us about X? And all of us as graduate students, we answered that question. We said, well, it tells us this and it tells us that. The answer that the professor was looking for was that in the absence of theory, the data is irrelevant. Put differently, you could say, without clear goals or strategies, or without an understanding of what you need to measure and why, data is irrelevant. So it's a grounding. It's a way to make us think about, we have to understand our goals to understand the data that we need. and then understand how the collection of data, using data to drive our decision making, how that in turn shapes what we do, changes what we do, changes maybe higher education in some way as well. So our guests today are going to explore this. We're going to hear from some fantastic thinkers and leaders in this area to explore the implications for USG and our partners if data is central to our work and our decision making. And how can we utilize data to build a more strategic approach to our academic planning, to build stronger pathways for student success and to foster innovation. So I'm going to introduce our guest speakers who will take it from here. But just before I do that, I just want to recognize my co-chair in the Strategic Planning Committee, Professor Ike Leggett. Ike, do you want to say a few words before we get going? Oh, you're on mute, Ike.
I said not at this time. I'll come back later.
All right, thank you so much, Ike. All right, so let me introduce all of our speakers at once, and then we will they will take it one at a time. So I'm just going to bring up a screen here that shows all of our speakers, so you all can see our speakers. There we go. Today we're going to be hearing from Tiffany Hosey, who is the founder and CEO of Build Data Analytics. We're going to hear from Brian Good, who is a lead gaming and simulation engineer at the MITRE Corporation, and I have to say a former colleague at Virginia Tech as well. We are going to hear from John Fritz, who's the Associate Vice President at Instructional Technology and Affiliate Assistant Professor of Computer Science and Electrical Engineering at UMBC. And we're also going to hear from Gail Fink, Assistant Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness, Office of Planning, Analysis, and Accountability at Bowie State University. I want to thank them all personally for the hard work and energy that goes into developing this. I'm going to ask Brian Good to start us off. Brian.
Hello, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Thank you for the introduction, Anne. Let me get the right screen here. All right. Can everybody see the presentation? Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So good morning once again. I'm Brian Good, and this morning I want to take a few minutes, and I want to highlight or give a brief perspective of the practice of being data driven. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to focus too much on the tools that we have available for different data explorations and analytics. Instead, I want to focus more on the surrounding issues of being data driven and the mentality and the efforts involved in that practice. So once again, thanks for having me, and look forward to the discussion. The first thing I want to highlight is the metaphor behind being data driven. So at its root, we've got data, which is evidence. It's something that we collect, we investigate, and it has properties of evidence. Something has happened, and the more we collect, if we if we get up to big data, it means we have lots of evidence. And then the second part of it is the data-driven part. And in other words, the metaphor has this conceptual tone of gaining momentum from evidence, and we're using our evidence to move and propel us. And so there's a lot of looking into what are our tools for building that momentum and that vehicle that we use to move and propel our decision making. But I think there's this other sort of I call it here an aspirational connotation, and that is we have to consider, well, where are we moving to? where are we now? Where are we going now? And very importantly, and what I think will be discussed a lot in this session is, how do we measure our progress? And finally, as part of this practice, as part of this process, we're setting up a goal, something we want to strive for, something we want to take take the evidence, build our momentum, and we want to go somewhere. But the idea is we want to constantly reevaluate that process, and we want to make sure that make sure I move this out of the way in case that's blocking the slides. Go ahead and minimize. So the idea is that we reevaluate where we're going so that our goals evolve over time. So in terms of data driven, the neat thing about this is this has been practiced for generations. This is one of my favorite books, actually. It's called East is a Big Bird, written by Thomas Gladwin in 1970. And it's all about navigation. And so the reason I bring this up now is because navigation is a very data-driven practice. We're looking out, we're taking measurements, we're looking at where we are, where we want to go, and what course corrections we need in order to get to where we want to go. And I love to sail, so it's it's a great metaphor I like to bring in as well. And so the idea of extending on this data-driven metaphor and building momentum is we're using our evidence gathering, our eyesight, or things to set the course of our boat. And I think a lot of folks can relate to that. I mean, we drive around with maps. We have our iPhones telling us how to get from point A to point B. And so I think the metaphor is pretty comfortable, except in the navigation practiced here in this particular group, the perspective's a little different. The data that you and I might collect if we were out trying to navigate, we might look at our GPS, we might look at our compass. The navigation practiced by the Poolwat is actually a little bit different. It's a mental conception where they actually visualize out at sea islands that other folks don't necessarily have, but it's a mental practice that is used for navigation. So if, for example, if I were to go out and engage in that data-driven process, I'd be rather lost. But the practice of the society has a different perspective on the data they gather. And so we have this sort of fork in the road where we can see where this is just an example of how the same data gathering process, vision, could have a variety of different impacts on the perspective of how we use that data. And so that's something I want to focus in on going forward. Obviously, we're not necessarily going to be navigating in this context. We have a lot of different tools that we're using. And particularly, over the years, our ability to collect data and repurpose, put these into algorithms, and then store and process the data is exploded. We have evidence at our fingertips. And so as a result, I look at these three things as our vehicle. This is what we're trying to steer and navigate. Our data collection. How are we repurposing, or how are we gaining access to the data that we have? A lot is available. Right now, in terms of repurposing alone, someone's commute might say a lot about their current health status. We have analysis methods and algorithms that are openly and widely available to the public and open source. It's very easy to download in seconds an algorithm that employs machine learning to be able to read in that data that's been collected and come up with results. And then finally, with Amazon and Microsoft, we can scale this process very rapidly. So we can start off with a very seedling idea and then grow it. And although we have all this at our fingertips, in the metaphor of being data driven and building that momentum, I look at this as the vehicle. And so we have a lot of focus here on these methods, but what about the steering of this vehicle? And so there's a couple things where in this part, you know, we start to look away from the, or not look away, but we start to focus more on the qualitative aspects of our data-driven process versus, you know, the quantitative, like getting the data and processing. The questions I want to ask or bring up today, you know, looking more at the qualitative of who or what is steering this vehicle that we're putting together, our data analysis and systems and data collection. What is the environment we're working in? And what will our experience be when we reach our goal? And by that question, I mean, how do we go and think about what we will become as a part of this data-driven process? In other words, can we envision once we reach the goal, what do we look like as an organization? And what does it take to get there? And then lastly, what are our limitations? What are the things that we need to be cautious of as we set our expectations? And so at the root of this, the measures and the metrics are our guides. They're responsible for guiding us and steering, you know, our metaphorical data-driven process. So what this means is, as we collect our data and as we run our analyses and we learn from them, we're going to be using some kind of error metric to guide our decision making, where we want to go next, where we have been, how far along we've come, how far we have to go. And the measures and the metrics, it's like taking a ruler and saying, well, this is how far we have to go. But the key is the way the measure or the metric is translated into practice is largely guided by our intent. So if we want to get somewhere and we need to measure it, we might be forward looking in one way, saying, okay, in order to get there, we know we need to measure X, Y, or Z. So maybe that's student enrollment. So we want to increase student enrollment, so we'll measure the amount of students that have applied, been accepted, and moved through. And the goal of enrollment is there. However, the phase space of the measure, or the measure itself, can have multiple facets to different people. And so that's where the intent versus the phase space has to come in, because we have to look and say, well, what does this measure actually mean to many different folks? And so we can't always predict where the measure and metric choices might lead. So let's do a quick example. I know I'm running a little bit late on time, but let's run through a quick example. So if we're looking at two metrics, and hopefully my cursor is showing, let's consider enrollment and graduation rate, just as two metrics that we might choose for our data-driven system. So we're going to collect data that'll give us insight on enrollment and graduation rate. The thing is, if we look at this like a map, the data-driven process literally sees it, as we look at it now, as points in a overall space. There's no necessarily meaning in the data-driven system. That's where we as people who are working with the data-driven system come in. And so a very obvious question is, well, where's the best outcome? Do we want more enrollment and a higher graduation rate? Or do we want to increase the graduation? Am I back? It says I was muted.
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay. Um, Let me know if I'm going on too long. But the idea here is saying, well, let's consider this point here. If our data-driven system looks at this as a point, it's up to us and the people around us to give context to that point. And so we have to ask, what does a higher graduation rate mean to the students? It means that we're helping more students succeed through the process. What does it mean to the professors and the community leaders and the employers? For example, is the graduation rate the only thing that matters, or do we have to consider the diversity of the graduates and the skills that are being entered into the workforce? And so for each of these points, the development of it, the development of the context means we have to have a conversation among all those involved, because what we want to do is we want to consider the landscape involved in where these points lie. So back to the navigation metaphor, we want to be able to draw, okay, is there a reef right here? Is there an obstacle right here that we need to avoid to get here? Or do we actually want to be here because there's an obstacle here? And so we need to start to take this blank canvas with these points as measures, and we need to start filling in the details and color in where are these points, and then what does it look like when we're there, and then do we need to add perhaps more measures or metrics? Do we need to qualify our progress, or do we need to understand the path dependency needed to get from one point to another? And then lastly, what's the communication strategy across the organization so that it's understood how the points come together and how our measures and metrics will lead us to where we want to go. And so to start to bring this together, when we're filling in that blank canvas, the thing we want to do is look for ways of, as we're measuring and conducting our investigations and collecting data, we want to concern ourselves with the possibility of emergence or complex behaviors that might result that we didn't think of originally. So it takes some conversing among multiple perspectives to try and tease out, well, what are the possibilities of new behaviors emerging from our system, and then how do we mitigate unintended consequences as they arise, the unpredicted consequences of employing our data-driven strategy. And then lastly, what are our constraints on available actions? And then related to that, what are the assumptions that we're using to specify all three? And so it's a way of going in as we're filling in that map and what each of those points mean. It's a way to look at and evaluate what the measures and metrics mean to those that have a stake in it, from students to professors to admins to employers, the community, and beyond. So just as a final thought in my final minute here, I when I think of this, I think of the question, are you on the island or not? So this goes back to that metaphor of navigating. And the reality is, in a data-driven environment, there's going to be times where you're pursuing a path, and maybe an unintended consequence emerges. And so the question is, are you at a point in your process where you can reevaluate? Can you reevaluate the objectives and the measures and metrics that you've set to achieve those objectives? And what is the plan for doing so? Now, if you're out at sea and trying to navigate, maybe that's not the best time to do it. But if you have the space and the opportunity to evaluate, identify it and make time for it so that we can constantly go over and say, well, are we becoming what we want to become as an organization? And so parts of that, to that is to challenge how the process is working and remaining vigilant for our unintended consequences. And then, as with anything, these two are kind of related, but do we have an appreciation throughout all those involved, for our previous experience and what's led us to the point. So as we are reevaluating, it's a continual learning exercise, and then also allowing for humans in the loop. So I hope that kind of helps set the set a not I hope that helps to set kind of a mindset or an approach to establishing measures and metrics that it's not quantitative, but I'm hoping it at least instills some sort of the sort of human part of establishing the measures and metrics, so that everyone can be involved in establishing where you want to go. Just some useful references that I found. This is the book referenced earlier. Edwin Hutchins' Cognition in the Wild talks about how knowledge is distributed throughout an organization. Very, very useful, particularly in a distributed data-driven environment. And then lastly, Matt Salganek's Bit by Bit, where he talks about different uses of data, repurposing, and so on and so forth. So I have some questions for the breakout exercise, but I think the moderators have some of their own. So with that, I'll go ahead and conclude. Thank you very much.
Brian, thank you so much. Very thought-provoking and a good start for us. So we're going to go into breakout rooms to start to think about this real quickly. It's about 10 minutes, Mary, is that right, for the breakouts? And Mary, do you want to put the question for the breakouts in the chat? And then Jeff can send us into our breakouts, and then come back because we have 3 more presentations and a breakout following those 3 presentations.
Yeah, I will just add that the each breakout has their own Jamboard to be using for the questions. So you will be having a Jamboard to work on in your own breakout. I'll put the question up now.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're not going to do a round robin right now. We're going to get on with the next round, but we'll do some bigger takeaways from all the Jamboard work at the end. So our next speaker is going to be John Fritz, and John's going to be talking on pandemic silver linings and analytics. John?
Great. Can you all hear me okay? All right. Give me a second just to queue up the presentation here. So, all right. All right. 1 second. That was our Jamboard. All right. Hide this here. How about now? Can everybody see my presentation okay?
Yep.
We're good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, great. First of all, thank you for having me. This is, I've been a kind of a admirer of USG. I'm glad to see some of my UMBC colleagues here, Diane, Katie, Chelsea, and occasionally I've been able to come out to campus there. And so I'm always interested in what you folks are doing, especially that kind of feeding in from multiple campuses. How you make that work is always amazing to me. So I'm going to try to take us through real quickly with a couple of things, and then we'll hopefully give us something to think about. So I am here just to stir the pot, but let me give you a little preview of what we'll be doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our planning instructional variety and online teaching initiative that we did a year ago. When we all went online. How do you get the faculty ready for that? So we'll talk just a little bit about that. Going to talk a little bit about something that I was very focused on was how do we protect academic integrity in online exams. We're going to talk a little bit about the use case of 2 professors who did so without surveillance software. Talk a little bit about our finish line near completer program, and then I'm hoping that this will kind of lead us into kind of a broader conversation about not only the use of learning analytics, but ethical learning analytics. So hang on, and I'm going to take us through this pretty quickly, okay? So the link, and I'll share the slides, but the link at the top to Pivot goes to the program. But I thought I would just start with some of the data that we've learned from the experience. So first of all, and it's kind of buried in the slide here, but 70% of all of our faculty participated in one way or another. There's various flavors of Pivot in terms of whether or not people were in a live webinar or in cohorts, but overall 70% of our faculty participated, which I've been at UMBC for 25 years now, and as a training program for faculty, it is by far the largest training we've ever done. You know, if you got training in the past, you know, where you got 20, 30 faculty, maybe 40, you know, think that was a good day, but to get all of the faculty through in the summer was amazing. Of those who participated, 85% felt like it was helpful. Similarly, 85% of students in courses taught by Pivot felt that they flowed well and were in a logical format. I should, you know, preface here as well, my colleagues in instructional technology, especially Sherry Braxton, who's no longer with us, but Marianne Hawk and Susan Bureau, this was their baby and they did a great job with it. But it was also informed by Quality Matters. So if you want to, we can learn a little bit more about that, you know, after the fact. What I was interested in is also 31% of the faculty who you know, were open after going through this, we're now open to teaching online. I can tell you right now that before the pandemic, I could count on one hand the number of online only undergraduate courses that we had. That has changed. I don't know where things are going, but I'm hopeful that we retain some of that online capability because it has some implications for enrollment management as well. So a couple of other things that are kind of interesting is the student evaluation, electronic evaluation questionnaire. I think it used to be CEQs. A modest, very small increase in satisfaction compared to courses where the faculty did not go through Pivot. The courses where the faculty went through that, we saw higher uses of the LMS by the students, which you'll have to take this as kind of an assumption, but I do believe that students' digital footprints can be a proxy for their engagement. Doesn't necessarily mean it's their learning, but it gives us a way to sort of see what's going on there. And then a little bit of a brag, our team won the UMBC Job Well Done Award for Pivot, and we just found out that we're also in the online learning consortium. We have been identified as an exemplary practice award winner. That's not so I sort of let that out of the bag, but you know, so some nice things there. I wanted to talk a little bit about as well. So this is an example of what came out of Pivot. In our College of Natural and Mathematical Sciences, CNMS, these are large STEM courses where the faculty were understandably concerned with how they were going to do online exams and promote academic integrity. I have a separate presentation. There's a link to this story that, you know, has some more information, but long story short, what they did was rather than maybe have a set of questions, maybe 40, 60 questions in exam, they had a question bank of nearly 1,500 questions. They also used the LMS to randomize which questions got to which groups of students, and the students were randomized as well. Essentially what happened was there was no two students got the same exam, but the exams were delivered with the same rigor. There's more information here than I can take time here as well. It's worth taking a look at. In addition to what they've done with academic integrity, they've now leveraged this question bank for an adaptive learning, personalized learning approach to the course with Realize It that we're doing this summer and rolling it out in the fall. Just a little snapshot of sort of what the student experience was like. In spring 21, our averages across all Blackboard Learning Management System courses was about 3,000 minutes for the students, each one of the students in their courses. And they would submit about 20 assignments. In these Chem 101 and 102 courses, they were spending, 10,000 minutes and 200 assignments. And when I say assignments, I mean even spot quizzes, electronic collection of homework, certainly exams. But what you get is a sense of engagement that is literally almost orders of magnitude different than what you saw on the average. And we saw similar in terms of introductory and basic physics, which also adopted their approach. And then the other thing that we have seen for a long time is CNMS, which is our STEM college. It has historically had high LMS use because they make extensive use of assignments and assessments. So auto-graded quizzes are sort of the killer app of an LMS to the extent that you use it more so that students can get time on task practice. That's a key thing that we were trying to do. This was important as well. I talked about sort of the very low number of undergraduate online courses. Well, as a result of having a plethora of online undergraduate courses, our head of enrollment management, Yvette Mosey-Ross, vice provost for enrollment management and planning, she and her team reached out to students and said, look, if you ever wanted to finish your degree, now's the time to do it because we've got online courses and you don't have to come to campus to take them. Well, we make this pitch to long lost students all the time. I think typically we may get 6 or a dozen. We got 123 in the fall and then over 100 in the spring. And now going forward, this has started to catch on. And I've heard Yvette say as well, given the impact that the pandemic had on sort of the traditional student age population, if we had not had these finish line students, we'd have been hurting more from a budget standpoint than would otherwise have been the case. So, we're sort of waking up to online learning in different ways. We've certainly had it in our applied master's programs. I think we have 3 or 4 programs with that, but at the undergraduate level where students can finish, and in some cases, these are students who were, 8-10 years removed from the institution, but they were missing 1 or 2 courses. To be able to get those people over the finish line. Anyway, I've made some links here to some information that might be interesting. There's a link to the video here. It's kind of neat, of what they found out as well. So let's. Those are just a couple of the sort of pandemic silver linings. I want to pivot, if I can, to sort of use of data. I think Brian, raised some interesting questions about, where do you want to go, relative to what you're starting out with. And I wanted to just kind of make a general pitch for sort of an ethical approach to learning analytics, but I'm going to give you a little twist. When I go to analytics conferences or EDUCAUSE, which is the higher ed IT conference, a lot of times what I will hear when people talk about analytics is, for lack of a better term, the collective wringing of hands. Should we collect data? What are the implications of the data? And I will sometimes hear people talk about FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. At UMBC, and I've been there for a while now, and it's just been in the culture, is I would say we take a proactive stance on student data, namely that FERPA not only allows, but I think obliges institutions to study their own data of past students to try to improve the experience of current and future ones. Yes, we have to protect their privacy. Yes, we need to keep the information confidential, but we're sitting on, big data that is begging to be analyzed and, more importantly, acted upon. So, this is an article that or chapter I've done with a colleague, John Whitmer, who I've done a number of things with, where we kind of just explore a sort of do no harm, don't abuse the data versus, the sort of code for FERPA that I have seen at conferences in the past, which is do nothing. And I don't want to, I'm not advocating for that. So, that's sort of the framework that I'm going to go through in sharing here. And here's why. The problem with grades is they occur too late in the term to be actionable for the students or the faculty. So we have got to figure out ways that we can understand sooner, and maybe especially in the digital learning environments that we're in now, who's engaged and who's not. That's not to say that they're learning. I want to be clear. Engagement is different from learning, and certainly as a proxy, students' digital footprints are that, a proxy. They are not the same as student learning, which I think is a wonderful human mystery. So, but we need to be able to try to get access to that information soon. And I'm going to give you an example. So this is a finding from a paper that we did a couple years ago. I've kind of already shown you sort of profiles of UMBC Blackboard courses, but these are two different courses in the same semester. The course on the left is different than the course on the right. And if we were to have a little Jamboard or a little poll, I could probably get a variety of things. But let me just kind of orient you to this. So every row on this is a student in both courses. Every column is a week in the semester. And the color density of the cell, the light blue to dark blue, is sort of, in this case, it's actions. It could also be minutes. It could also be assignment submissions, whatever you want to do. What you can see here is these were both fall semesters. You can see kind of in the first course on the right, about 3/4 of the way, you can see Thanksgiving. And if you look closely on the right here, you can sort of see that as well. The other thing I should have mentioned is that these are all students that are organized by the final grade that was earned in the course. So, if I were to ask you, what's the difference between the course on the left and the one on the right? The most obvious one to me when I look at the course on the right is this is the typical 2 midterms and a final. The student activity, is not as strong at the beginning. You have kind of 2 concentrations where it puts together, and then there's a heavy push to begin. By contrast, what you see on the left is something where students are doing something every week. They are engaged. They are asked to produce and perform. The other thing I would notice is that when you look at sort of the DNF students on both sides, what's interesting is in the first week in both courses, there isn't a huge amount of difference between students who eventually earned A's and students who eventually earned F's. Now, by week 2, it definitely changes, both in terms of the color intensity, and in some cases, these are students in the course on the left and especially on the right who are literally evaporating. We call this a waterfall chart for a reason. And these are drops of water. You see some students who just not are engaged. And if we went by grades alone, we wouldn't know soon enough to be able to intervene. And so that's why I say grades alone are not actionable. The only other thing I've wanted to do in the past is give every student kind of their own "you are here" red dot, like you see at the Disney map, so that they could just gauge for themselves by intensity, by frequency, how they compare with their peers. They wouldn't know anybody's name, but they would be able to see where they stand. Now, of course, they wouldn't have the benefit of knowing final grades, but you could change that final grade pattern by GPA band, either cumulative or the prior term. There's a lot of ways that we could share data that could also be motivating for students as well. This is an interesting visualization from Indiana University. I went to their Learning Analytics Summit in 2019, and then it got canceled because of the pandemic. But I wanted to just kind of explain as well, grades alone don't help us. So, we've got to find ways to not only engage students, but know what they know. So in this visualization, this is sort of the analytics of student grade surprise. What's going on here, there's over 6,000 students that were surveyed in 2019. And what they asked students was before the first exam in the course, and it ranged from STEM courses to psychology, sociology, English, and I think there was an art history course as well. But what they do is ask the students before the exam, what would you predict your final grade will be in the course? And then after that exam, they'd ask the same question. What do you think your grade will be? And then there's the actual grade that they earned. And what you see is how this is a Sankey diagram that sort of shows how students' perceptions of what they think they know, and then the rude awakening for some, changes their perception as they're going through the term. What's interesting too is you even have before the first exam, some students down here that think they're going to get a C, and there's a tiny little sliver here of, after that exam, they feel pretty good. Some of them revert to norm, but others start getting into other sort of rivers and troughs that might take them forward as well. So it's an interesting kind of way that as you have data that's both digital footprints in a system, but also survey data, you could have a nice kind of mixed method approach to looking at where students are before and during the term. I want to call out, I think a lot of people are familiar with Thaler and Sunstein's choice architecture. Basically, they talk about choice architects as those who can put together, an environment that facilitates people's choice. Now, I won't get into the libertarian paternalism, but the idea is that you have a notion, maybe this is Brian's island navigation. You have a notion of where you'd like students to be, and you want to create environments that preserve choice and agency so that they can pursue it. Well, Thaler and Sunstein are all about the data and the analytics and how choice architects, which I think many of us at our institutions are, create experience of sort of the students to be able to go through. So I've always sort of used this as sort of a frame for what we're doing with our analytics. Now I'm going to throw something at you here really that is just going to be overwhelming. So what I want you to do is focus on here. I want you to look at this as a timeline for the semester. And what we're really talking about is what are the things that we can present to students, the right message to the right person at the right time. What I'm going to say is that at the beginning of the semester, and certainly up to midterm, we should be trying to facilitate student agency and choice. At the same time, if they don't pay attention, we may have to get more intrusive, and I'll show you what that means. So, for example, in Psychology 100, Eileen O'Brien, Diane, your colleague, maybe you've done this as well, but we have learned a lot from her use of syllabus quizzes that students who just took the syllabus quiz at the beginning of the semester were 4 times more, if they didn't take it, were 4 times more likely to get a DF or W, drop, fail, or withdrawal. Similar kinds of things with econ students. So we can kind of help students to kind of steer them in the way they should go. As the semester progresses, we might take a look at some of those waterfall charts, maybe looking at the textbooks or, our own Check My Activity at UMBC. By midterm, though, there's not a lot of runway for students to alter their trajectory. So we might need to be getting a little bit more involved. That's why at UMBC, we have our first year intervention alert saying, look, if the semester were to end tomorrow, your professor is saying you would or would not pass the course. We might even do some nudges to try to get people back in it. But if they still haven't paid attention by week 12, it may be now's the time to start thinking about withdrawal. Maybe we need to preserve your course or your GPA and start trying to understand what happened so that we can see, is this the right major for you? So I know it's overwhelming. But I wanted to take you through it. And these are just some example nudges that we could take a look at. The takeaways I would give are this. Now, be open to the use of students' digital footprints as a proxy for their engagement, especially early in the term. I use big data for kind of a bird's eye view of certainly our LMS so that I can study quantitative trends and then I will look for the positive outliers, both in the student experience and in the faculty course design. And then use that as an opportunity for qualitative interviews with the faculty member. What are you doing in your course, Diane, that is making students so active? To see, is this something that we can reverse engineer and apply, or at least present to other faculty to consider? And so it works both ways in both the student experience and then also for the faculty course design. Why this matters, I would finish whenever you finish with Freeman Hrabowski. That's not a bad way to end, but I've heard him say this a number of times. If you want to change the culture of an institution, you want to shine light on success, not failure. We need to be able to find it. We need to be able to say what it is, and we need to be able to lift it up for others to consider. I'm simply putting forward a way in which the use of data could help us find. those positive outliers to shine light on their success. And I will stop there. So thank you for your attention and interest, and I will leave it there. Thanks.
John, thank you so much. What a great overview of ways to creatively use data to drive success in higher education. And I'm hoping that everyone's going to be thinking about these same kinds of questions and applications, not only for students, but for the broader work of USG and our partnerships, and be thinking about how this might apply to USG in creative ways. We will, after our next two presentations, we will do a collective Jamboard with all of us together instead of breaking out into breakout groups. So stay tuned and hold your questions and be thinking about them as we go forward. Our next presenter is Gail Fink, who's going to talk about applications of data-informed strategic and operational planning. Gail, take it away.
Thank you very much. Let me try to take it away. There we go. Hopefully you all can see the screen. If I can see a nod, that's a yes. And you can hear me clearly? All right, that's a double nod. So thank you, Dr. K, for inviting me today. And I really want to let you know how much I appreciate both Brian and John's comments so far, because they've actually taken some of my thunder. But I'm going to use what they've said to sort of build on where I'm going. So today I just wanted to share, let's see if I can get my screen to go there. Yeah. Build a little bit upon what Brian has mentioned in my personal philosophical approach after 30 plus years of being in the institutional research business and policy analysis business. I actually want to share some practical examples and strategies that USG may want to consider for assessing not only its own effectiveness as a regional setter, but possibly getting in the realm of working with its partners to assess educational effectiveness. And then finally, I will share some opportunities and lessons learned as we bring it to closure. So let's get this ball rolling. Brian provided a very good description of data-driven from his philosophical, from his perspective. And I like to use data-informed. So I think we're both aligned in that data and information inform knowledge, decisions, and actions. Those are the two oranges, all about the data, but the human impact of decision-making has to be included. I think that sometimes I will say some of my colleagues will get stuck that data-driven decision-making is more really about letting machine language or artificial intelligence drive decision-making. And I will honestly say that I am not there yet, because I think the human factor is incredibly important when it comes to decision-making. So from there, though, I want to just show what colleagues from USG and those working on the strategic planning group to think about where USG falls. And I hopefully when this comes out, you can have a better look at it. Down at the bottom here is really about what I would call entry-level information, as opposed to analytical information that looks at statistical analysis, forecasting, modeling, and optimization. So when I think about my institution at Bowie State University, I have been there over 10 years. And I would say when I came in there, we were in this middle part of the lower half. And in 10 years, we've moved to the early analytics part of our journey here. So I'm thinking with USG and the types of information that I know that we send the institution as well as what it can collect, I will honestly say that maybe you are down here in the point where Bowie was maybe 10 years ago. I'm being quite honest. We can all have a discussion on that. But I just think that when you're thinking about using information to drive decision-making, you have to be honest about where you are and where you want to go. I mean, I think that aspiration and building aspiration into your strategic planning process is an excellent idea. I'd like to move on because, all is not lost. And I will just say too, that we have been lucky enough at Bowie State University to recognize that information is critical to support the assessment of learning, as well as the assessment of our business practices. And in fact, it is a strategic objective underneath our innovation goal of our strategic plan. So we are putting actually money where our mouth is to move our processes and our information collection, storage, and data sharing, moving it forward. And we are held accountable to doing that. So so that's where I'm just, again, suggesting that it be part of your strategic plan. And then maybe use the rest of these things that I'm going to talk about in a few moments to help frame some of that discussion. But some other philosophies that I have about data, and my colleagues on the call and from institutional research who have known me for some time will know that I am one of these people that collect it once and use it many ways. Please do not just do a once and done. No, we all don't have enough time to that. Let's put a little thought into how we collect information and then try to have it satisfy multiple purposes. And I would also say we need to triangulate our data that we get from student information systems with indirect stakeholder feedback. And I think if we think about triangulating multiple data sources, we get a much richer set of information to help inform decision making. I think that the way to go for Shady Grove is to also seriously engage partners about how we can use existing sources in different ways and engaging them in expanded information collection. And then finally, which I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on today, as a regional center, I really believe that there should be a regular and systematic process of environmental scanning, because you don't know what you don't know. And it is critical for Shady Grove to be current and actually cutting edge and getting ahead of some of the curves that you think that the area is indicating where they're going to be going, and the employers and the educational community. So I'm just suggesting that, but I won't be talking about it today. So from here, I wanted to go into actually some physical examples of how data can support either strategic planning or operational effectiveness, and just talk a little bit through them. For those of you, this is the Maryland Managing for Results report for Bowie State University. What is the Managing Results report? Well, it is a required report for all Maryland agencies. It's my understanding that Shady Grove is in the process of creating this for the first time, and we'll be submitting it in this fall as part of this process. Here's why, even though it's a state report, the legislature sees it, the Maryland Higher Education Commission sees it, our cabinet reviews it and approves it. It is really our external accountability tool in Maryland, in addition to what we have at the federal level and everything else, but this is an accountability tool. And it also will speak, and I'll show you how we use it once, do it once and use it many ways in a moment. But what I like about this is that it links your goals, your objectives, provides metrics, and it provides where you think you're going. If you notice how every single objective here has a goal associated with it. So we either want to increase our course units, we want to maintain levels of satisfaction, we want to increase the number of our STEM program enrollments and graduates. There are actually quantitative numbers associated with this. So the MFR requires us to set goals. That's not something we like to be held accountable to sometimes in higher education. I like to let it float a little bit. So this is the MFR report. What you'll see next is a set of KPIs for our strategic plan at Bowie State University. For our 5 goals, we have developed a set of key performance indicators that we feel help further describe, what we hope to achieve related to each goal. You'll notice that right in that goal 1, there are a number of the same indicators that I just had in the Managing for Results report. And again, we're trying to show consistency and alignment and transparency across multiple sources. So we're not necessarily trying to have a set of key performance indicators that are good for the state but not good internally. Let's try to keep it all together. But what I like about the KPIs for our strategic plan is that it drills down even further to what we value as a university. So, for example, we go into a lot of detail about first year retention rate for our first-time full-time degree-seeking students. That's fine, but we also look at transfers. We also track graduate students. So you're not seeing all that, but those are things that we value here, and those are further down in the KPIs when we start going through this. We actually have, it's important to us, our athletics are an important part of our history and our culture at our university. So the graduation rate of our athletes, as well as the number of championships, is also in our key performance indicators. So when you're thinking about your strategic plan and your KPIs, I'm going to ask you to try to be deliberate in thinking about what data that you have for your goals and objectives, what data you have, and what data best represents that process. You may not have all the answers as you're developing the strategic plan, but at least as you are thinking about, each goal, that you actually just put out there for discussion purposes, what it is that you value and that you can measure. So if I move to a little bit more of an operational approach here, enrollment dashboarding is a wonderful thing. I will say that each of your member institutions submits course and enrollment information to you on a daily basis in different forms, because there's separate MOUs with every partner institution. However, it is something to consider if you can use that information with partners' approvals to actually try to do enrollment tracking over time. It will tell you what your facilities usage is going to be, how it compares to previous years. It will tell you if enrollment's on target. It will tell you, my gosh, what happens if you have a flood of people? What happens if the shift is more now online? And how does that impact facilities usage? And you can start having those management types of discussions about what this information means. I will say at Bowie, this was a godsend for us. And especially in the midst of COVID, you can see this is a spring 21 tracking. We actually knew in December that we were feeling that we were going to have a problem meeting our enrollment target. Having this dashboard discussed every week in cabinet, having data people, myself at the table in cabinet, talking about, okay, I'm getting the feeling, I can see that our returning students are not coming back. What kind of strategies can we implement to try to stem the tide in January? Because, hey, you're not going to be able to do anything over winter break. We have 30 days in January to try to bring these students back. And what were their challenges? So, I mean, the institution, after the leadership discussing these, this dashboard, put in place a number of strategies to bring students back and interventions, and apply funding from the CARES funding for students who had debt at the end of the fall term. And we can say we had limited success, if you want to know the honest truth. But the lessons that we learned from that, those sets of interventions have helped us be more proactive and get ahead of the curve for the fall 21 class, or for the fall 21. So we are being a lot more deliberate and a lot more intrusive and earlier than where we had when we were trying to be just in time in spring of 21. So operational tracking of enrollment, I think, is critical, just to help you all manage expectations as well as manage the physical location of Shady Grove. I also want to encourage you to, there was actually a number of conversations about the value of surveying. Brian brought it up. It was actually discussed in our breakout session a few moments ago. I actually, and all of the notions of surveying, are they representative? All that, I can tell you, we kind of got handcuffed a little bit by this in the fall. So we could actually, when we were surveying students in the fall, we'd be coming back everybody was going, yay, we're coming back. And that's when we started getting jammed up in December, when we weren't seeing that level of re-enrollment, we're like, was that really a representative sample? So that's my little bit of caution about survey data, but I also going to say there's a value here too. So we've been doing a lot of these pulse surveys during COVID, a couple question surveys. What are you doing? So are you coming back in fall, and what do you plan to enroll in? How does this, students wanted more of a combination of face-to-face classes and on-ground classes, and online classes, excuse me. So how does that notion juxtapose with the notions of leadership that we wanted to have as many in-person classes as possible? And so this was a little bit of a reality check that we had to be a little bit more balanced in our scheduling strategies for the fall semester, because students appreciated the flexibility of online instruction as a result of COVID. And as John said, Bowie State did not have many online courses. And we actually just got approved our first online program that we're going to be kicking off in the spring of 22, actually. So, we were not an online institution at all. So the notion that we've been doing is then using this survey information as a driver and continuously monitor course enrollments over the summer for the fall semester. We're adjusting the counts of our face-to-face sections depending on health and safety guidelines. We are adding online sections if we see that are for those who to meet or to provide that flexibility. Before we weren't adding them, but as sections fill, we're now moving into adding online sections, because again, do we want the density on campus to be any more than what we had originally scheduled? And the answer is, in my mind, no. So that's why we're switching now to meet demand, we're moving to online. So and then again, a lot of this came up with the juxtaposition between what students were saying. I track the enrollment patterns of students, so I know whether or not they are face-to-face only, a combination of face and online, and then online. So I can see that, overlay that with course enrollments, and then we can move on to then how to add sections. So I'm going to switch brief, and I'll be brief about these items because they're actually controversial. So let me just drop the bomb and go. So how can USG as an organization assess its core activity? And I'm going to say, of course, you cannot do it in a vacuum. Your partners at the system office, as well as on the campuses, are critical to this component. But this little thing, in my mind, may seem very simple, but I think it's a reality check that leadership at USG should consider. Really what you're trying to examine is, you look at a program of study that is at USG, and you look at the actual schedule of classes over time. Are the schedule of classes providing enough sections to meet the core requirements of the program on a reasonable schedule so that we can get these students out the door? I know that that sounds very simple, but I can just tell you sometimes maybe I'm sure all the departments are on top of this, but you never know until you just ask the question. So I would just say, would you think about considering asking a multi-year schedule for each of the programs so that you can get a sense of whether or not the core of any program is being offered in a reasonable time frame so that students can succeed. Just throwing that out there. And again, my colleagues, I feel the kicks under the table. Please do not go down there. The other thing I think is an opportunity for USG is to work with the system office to examine undergraduate student course success. The institutions provide the system office with regional center student and course files. That data can be matched up with, I'm sorry, I'm using jargon here, MHEC registration system files, student registration system files that include D, F, and W rates. And so if you match, what we send about students with that SRS, you can get the under of course success rates writ large. Another area of collaboration could be retention and graduation rates. And I believe some of this work may be already in process, but again, it's a matching of data that the system has already. And again, I'm not saying that just to go off, you will have to engage your partners in this process, all your partners, the educational partners, as well as the system office. But again, you're looking at the student file, plus the admissions file, plus the enrollment file, plus the degree file, equals retention and graduation rates. And then what I'm going to get down to now is actually the assessment of academic programs. And I will say that actually being asked to put this presentation together made me have an aha moment. Bowie State University is going through its Middle States reaccreditation, and we'll have our visit in the fall. And I'm like, well, I'll be darned. We need to maybe include in Bowie State University's program academic review of, or periodic review of academic programs, the notion of looking at modality, being deliberately including modality of program, as well as location of program, because we are now not only at USG, we're trying to increase our footprint in Southern Maryland, as well as Laurel. So, if we are trying to talk about as an institution for self-assessment purposes, quality of our programs, we should include that deliberately in our analyses. So I'm not sure if USG wants to work with its partners to see if there's anything that can be done with, when a program comes up for a periodic review. Is there any notion that there can be a component of that periodic review that looks at what is happening at Shady Grove? There's also, if depending on, every institution has their own, a different process for course and program level assessments. And there may be some opportunities for collaboration with partners if you at that level also. But again, that is not as systematized across the system, no pun intended there. But the periodic review of academic programs is once every 7 years. And is that possible to include regional center location? So some opportunities and lessons learned that I would like to share is, again, I think I said earlier, the deliberate inclusion of KPIs as you're planning or as you're developing your strategic plan. I love the top graphic on the right, looking at goals and objectives, but it's strategies and tactics where you really want to think about how to set performance measures. Not so much at the high level, but when you're doing that, when you're getting down to the minutia after you set them. You have your overarching KPIs, but then you're actually creating measures throughout each tactic or in strategy and tactic that you're doing to support your strategic plan. And that starts to answer the question, how do you know? Because that's what we all are trying to do, is ask that question, one, but also answer that question. And leadership has to be responsible for asking that question, how do you know? Because that encourages the use of data and information to support decision-making. Some ways that I think both Brian and even and John in some ways has talked about leveraging standard reports that we can get in multiple ways. Sharing, having transparency in data, sharing results with stakeholders, having a central repository for information. And then I'm going to say one of the best ways for you to document what you're doing with your strategic plan is actually to explore strategic planning tracking software. Because if you have goals and objectives, you will have most software includes strategy and tactics, and then you will have those measures in there, and you won't have to collect it from everybody around Shady Grove. You can actually have it centralized into one software. And in my mind, the bottom line is trying to be engagement or trying to be transparent when you engage USM and educational partners about doing data exchanges and sharing information related to student success and programmatic assessment. So let's see, I think that is all. I dropped the bomb and now I'm going to run. So thank you very much, Dr. K, and forward to our breakout sessions.
Thank you, Gail. Gail, don't run. Stay right there and help us figure this out. So it's awesome. Thank you so much. We have one more presentation. We're going to hear from Tiffany Hosey, who is, talk about disruption and innovation. Tiffany has created a company which has the potential to really transform the construction industry. And so really looking at the implications of data, not only for decision making, but on the structure of an organization and the industry it serves. After Tiffany's presentation, we're going to do a collective Jamboard with all of us in this group. So Tiffany, take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to participate today. I'm probably going to repeat some of the things that we've heard already, but I'll try to add a little twist to the narrative. So before I get started with the PowerPoint, I just wanted to give you a bit of background of how I got here. So I started my career as a corporate defense trial attorney, and my family started a construction company, and I had never done that before. I didn't know anything about the industry. So I found myself working on a construction site for a couple of years during the construction of a 2 million square foot building. And that experience was extremely painful because my background in an evidence-based environment of the law, where I was in court just about every week as a litigator, I could never go to court and present my case to a judge or jury, starting a sentence with, I think, I believe, based on my experience, I want you to accept my conclusions. So when I got on the construction site, and my company would submit a pay application asking to be paid for the work performed for a particular period, or we would get accused of causing damage to some material. I would ask the person responsible for either paying us or penalizing us financially for the damaged assets. How did you conclude we're not entitled to 100% of payment for this period? How did you conclude we're the ones responsible for the damage? And guess how they started their sentences? Well, I think, well, I believe, well, based on my experience. And you can imagine how offensive that is for someone who grew up in a world where you starting sentences with those words, where the conclusions mattered, was offensive. So it inspired me to create a software platform, CTBIM. My company is called Build Data Analytics, and the software platform really is designed to inject an objective way of collecting unimpeachable evidence or data points from the people responsible for building structures directly from the field. So as they're receiving materials, if you know anything about construction, this is a world where, there's about $2 trillion of losses realized annually. And I always like to say, yeah, that's a big number that's going into, not into the ether, but it's going into someone's pocket. So there's inefficiency in the world of construction that someone is benefiting from. So naturally, that's going to cause tension when you're trying to eliminate that waste, fraud, and abuse. So my system collects the data points that people use in order to get paid on time, in order to defend themselves when they're being accused of installing something incorrectly or charged with damage to materials after they've been put in place. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and take you through a very brief PowerPoint. Let's see. All right, so because I grew up in the world of law, I did some research as a nerd to understand the history of construction. And one of the things I discovered, which was actually kind of shocking, is a quote or a sentiment expressed by someone about the quote unquote inadequate cost controls and poor construction management that was prevalent in that day. Now, I reference you back to that $2 trillion annual loss number that I mentioned earlier. And also, I think most of us can remember opening the paper at some point in our lives and seeing, oh, this particular city structure, school that had 100, like I think there was a school in DC that had the Duke Ellington School, I think they had $100 million cost overrun. There's the VA hospital in Aurora, Colorado that had $1 billion cost overrun. And I always said, well, exactly at what point does the hair start going on fire? Is it $5 million? Is it $50 million? $100 million? I mean, how do you get to $1 billion cost overrun without some answers or some questions being raised during the process of that construction? So this quote that I found about the inadequate cost controls and poor construction management was not made in 1970, was not made in 1990, was not made in the 2000s. It was made in 24 BC by Vitruvius, who was the chief engineer to Emperor Augustus and Julius Caesar. So that's why I have the Colosseum up, because that's sort of the era of when real recording of the kinds of problems that happened 24 BC are still applicable today in the 21st century. So what's the story? The way that I think about data is really retrospectively going to give you the story of in construction, your structure. So it's going to tell you who built something, how long it took them to build it, what errors were made, what's the estimating on point, did the actual estimates match the estimates, did the actuals meet the estimates, who are the high performing contractors, what are the best materials to use. That kind of data helps inform future building activities. And so if you think about just data in general, data can lead to some tremendous innovations. And if you think about DNA, because that's like construction touches all of us, well, we all have DNA. Or if you think about GPS, and I call CTBIM what Google Maps is to traffic, which is sort of what Brian was saying about the whole navigating. Well, Google Maps is to traffic. That's what the CTBIM is to construction. So Google Maps uses GPS to collect data in real time to help you navigate around obstacles that prevent you from reaching your destination on time. And so what we do is we collect data points from the field in real time to help owners of projects navigate around obstacles that prevent them from completing their projects on time and within budget. So ultimately, those data points, as you collect them retrospectively, can help you learn lessons about, well, next time, tomorrow, when I go to this location, I know that I need to navigate and plan for more time because we know that this particular construction is going on and that's going to delay us. Same thing in construction. But if you think about data, I call it the dilemma of data, because data is valuable, but the collection of data is one very difficult thing if you're doing it in a way that's going to be unimpeachable, that's going to be wholly objective and not subject to biases, right? But then there's interest. Who is interested in the data? There's some people who are not interested in the data because it threatens their business model. So as I was describing in the beginning, the quote from 24 BC about inefficiencies and waste, this construction industry has built into its business model an expectation of losses around inefficiencies. Most industries, I posit, have probably calculated inefficiencies into its business model. But you can imagine the amount of resources that can be freed up if data points were collected that were objective, that revealed ways around inefficiencies to help you meet your ROI. So the community, I'm going to start on the high end. So who has the highest visibility in data at the institutional level? It's going to be the institution, right? You're collecting your own data. And there's a push to share data with your colleagues in other institutions. But there's also a sense of territorialism, people who want to keep certain data points private because it reveals things that's not so complementary to the business of a particular institution. What are those data points that you as an organization will be willing to share? And culture, as an organization, are you willing to make a decision that if it reveals inefficiencies and you find a way to innovate around the inefficiencies and combat them, will you use that as a tool to promote your institution and to aid your fellow institutions so that in the end it helps the industry? Or do you want to, keep it close to the vest and realize the benefits of it and not tell the world and keep it siloed? But if you decide to share that data that you have innovated around and allowed for inefficiencies to be decreased, which benefits the industry of it, the business of education, the community ultimately benefits, and they don't have really a big competing interest in data. They just are the beneficiaries of, innovation from data.
Just went out. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. I just have to turn up my volume because I can't hear you now. All right, sorry about that. So with that, what I suggest is what I did is I went to pull some statistical information about higher education in general. And these are some stats on revenue growth, on the profit margins, profit, employment, wages, et cetera. So I challenge you to, I know that a lot of the discussions today have focused around actually academics and the effects of data on how education is provided to students and how you measure the results. I'm going to ask you to look at the business, your institution as a business. And I challenge you to try to find a way to be an outsider, even though you're an insider, right? So I was an outsider as someone who didn't grow up in the world of construction, and I didn't accept the way things were because that's how it's always been done. That's not how things have been done for me because that wasn't the world the professional world I grew up in. But as an insider, I'm going to ask you to take a step back and think about what are some of the inefficiencies that you as an organization can all agree upon, or at least have a conversation around, like assuming, for example, we don't accept that tenure has a continued ROI over the years, for example. What are the data points we can collect to gauge? At what point does tenure, first of all, what is the ROI of tenure? And then at what point does that ROI start to diminish? And if there is a point where it starts to diminish, then challenge yourselves to question, what is it that we can do to innovate around the idea of tenure so that we are on the forefront of driving efficiencies into higher education? That's just one example. I'm sure there are many you can come up with, but as someone who got into an industry as a novice, I knew nothing about construction. I was able to see opportunity to innovate because I did not accept the status quo. And I'm asking you, do not accept the status quo. Challenge yourselves to identify those areas in the business model of higher education, because you guys have got the educational part and covering the students pretty well framed, and some really great innovation around how to make improvements there. But I'm pretty sure there's opportunity to innovate around the business of higher education and your institution where you can find a way to innovate that will free up resources and allow you to redirect resources in ways that can be much more productive for you as an institution and also for the business and the industry of higher education. So with that, I tried to make it 15 minutes and I think I succeeded. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. And I hope this was thought-provoking at the very least.
Tiffany, thank you so much. There's nothing like having somebody from a different experience, a different perspective, shed some light and ask some great questions. So we really appreciate it. I think we should just open it up and have people share their thoughts and reactions, ideas that come from these 4 great presentations, applications to USG. Let's just open it up. I'd like, Ike, if it's okay, can we start with you for any thoughts that you have on this?
Yeah, I have so many. This has been such a wonderful series of presentation. And so this is just wonderful. But that last question is one that I think is a very important question. And I go back to our business model and whether we're going to seriously evaluate the use of data in 2 ways. One, internally, so that we look at ourselves in terms of a self-evaluation, but also externally so that we can possibly share with others and make the use of data potentially a profit center for us that we can share and help others in the industry. But the question that Tiffany asked a moment ago, are we willing to look at our business model in a serious vein? That is so important. In my experiences over the last 10 or 12 years as county executive, that was a really difficult question. We set up for the first time in the county a complete office of county stat. The sole responsibility is to gather, disseminate, and hopefully allow the county to better utilize data. It's called the county stat office, the 311 system that provides that, and inspect the general system. So I'm quite familiar with all of those things, but that question that she asks in terms of once you get that data, are you prepared to use the data to seriously question your business model? Because at that point in time, it will raise a series of questions for us. That same question goes back to the previous presenter who talked about course offerings. Are they efficiently being utilized? Do we provide the number of courses? All of those things impact a series of discussions that are difficult for institutions to have. Because when you talk about the business model, you talk about efficiencies, I think the very strong case can be made that we need to self-examine ourselves about that. And that's not an issue, and those are not questions that we seriously want to evaluate. I can't go to all of the things today. I have so many to talk about, and I know we're just about out of time, but we have this open discussion that's coming up pretty soon. And maybe we can kick forward some of those questions at that point in time.
Awesome. Thank you, Ike. Anybody else? Just jump in, open up your mic. Anybody? Or any of the presenters, if you have some observations as well.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Thank you so much for the great session. We learned a lot about what we're supposed to do and how we can go through that with the data. My concern about the data is always the ethical part of that. I hear we talk a little bit about that, about regarding to the students, but in general, collecting data and later doing some sort of the analysis through that is one serious point about that is how we deal with ethical part of that during the whole process from the collecting, analysis, and also reporting out. So what the approach you take it to go through all of these steps? I do appreciate if you go through this part of the data collecting too.
There are also some legal questions associated with the question that you've just raised in terms of limitation. There are several that I know of. There are some legal questions, the ethical question that you've just raised. There are the financial limitations that we've talked about. And there are also some technological questions, because I operated on the assumption after having great success with initial collection of data that I thought it was unlimited in terms of things that we could do. And there are some limitations about the technology that's there. So you have the technological limitations, you have the ethical and legal limitations, you have some societal limitations as well, and you have some financial limitations because this does not come free, and to do it right, it will cost a amount of money to do it effectively.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was just going to give some feedback on the question. So from in our experience in the construction world, one of the things that we did from a technology standpoint is try to make the way that we ask the questions of, so that for the data that we are collecting, we went through a painstaking process of making the questions so defined that you could only answer it either in the positive or negative and left little room for gray, right? And if there's gray area, then there's a way to address that in as much as in our industry, either, for example, either you put in a door or you didn't, and it'll date and time stamp the door and force you to take a picture, it'll record who did, et cetera. That's real easy. But then there's a question of, well, did you put in all the hardware for the door? Well, no, I didn't, but there's a reason why. And here's the reason why. So is that going to cause the schedule to be delayed? Is it the schedule delay your fault, or is it because the tanker got stuck in the Suez Canal and couldn't get there, and that was something that no one planned for? So, are you responsible, or is it something out of your control? And to sort of combat the inability to have just a pure technological, answer for these things, we also have consultants, and the human touch is also necessary. So we have consultants who'll call the data at particular intervals and use the data to provide narratives on how to stave off loss. The legal implications. It's still an open question because data is new in the law. And so there are new cases coming out all the time interpreting who owns the data, which is the biggest thing. Who owns the data? And how do you ensure that that ownership issue isn't going to cause other issues down the road? So that's something that you really do have to meet with your legal advisor and see if you can craft language that will help you sort of minimize disputes when it comes up with the data. One thing that we've done is the people who pay for our technology own the data, but then we have a right, and we put in our contracts, we have a right to use the data in aggregate and anonymously, right? So that sort of protects people from disclosing what they consider to be private information. From an ethical standpoint, I think that's sort of a conversation that an institution would have to have internally about the ethics of how this data is going to be used. And I think it has to be from, sort of led at the top, and then informing your decision-making about the kinds of data collected and from whom. So that's my my quick response to that. And I think someone else had some input, so thank you.
Thanks, Tiffany. I think PJ wanted to say, PJ, you've got the last word.
Oh, great. Putting the legal and ethical issues aside for a second, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection is historically USG has had a very difficult time getting data from participating institutions, which hamstrings USG's ability to examine the data of the students that attend USG and use it in the best light. That, if that's still the case, I think that needs to be addressed and worked on. Because if we don't have the whole picture, we're never going to be able to use data effectively for the USG community.
I'm not trying to dominate, but this just so resonates with my experience, and it's blowing my mind that the same issues I've had in the construction industry are the same issues you guys are struggling with and have struggled with in the past. One of the main concerns that we had in collecting the data is, first of all, garbage in, garbage out. Secondly, if the data is only useful I'm hurrying. The data is only useful if you get full participation. So what the workaround we have is, in order to get the participation, we tie payments. So a sub only gets paid for what can be validated in our system. So if there's some way to tie a monetary incentive to the data collection, which I don't know in higher education how you do that, but again, this is a business, I'm sure is a way to do it. I just offer that as one way that we figured out how to work around.
This is Mary. I'll just add one point, and it really highlights what Gail's challenges were to us. We're really couched in exactly that question, is getting the data from our partners, getting agreement from our partners that the benefit of finding out together the challenges that she raised can benefit all, can benefit their programs as well as the pieces at Shady Grove. So really the work around that combined with what you're saying is sharing the data, but then how we use it. And Gail, you gave wonderful examples of key pieces that would follow that we will need to do.
So I'm gonna keep to our promise of 2 hours, and a huge thank you to Tiffany, to Brian, to Gail, to John for your presentations, and really appreciate your participation today, and to Ebony with her mission moment, fantastic, and thank you all for joining us today. Keep these big ideas in mind. Let's bring them into the process, and hope to see you all at our next workshop on the 20th, I think it is. Is that right, Mary? Okay, on the 20th. Sign up. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.